I had given that woman 11 years of my life, my home, my trust, and every dollar I earned. And the morning I quietly moved my salary to a new account was the morning I finally discovered exactly what those 11 years had actually been worth to her. Welcome back to your ultimate destination for gripping revenge stories, family betrayals, shocking betrayals, and emotional justice. Subscribe now and join a community and tell us where you're watching from. Turn on the notification bell for our next story. Are you ready to witness the ultimate payback? Let's get started. I am Mr. ZAHA, and I am 68 years old. I want to be clear about something before this story goes any further, because I know how it sounds, and I know the assumptions that get made about men my age who find themselves in situations like this one. People hear 68-year-old man, and they imagine someone confused, someone who didn't see what was coming, someone who was naive in the particular, forgivable way of old men who want to believe the best of the people around them. That is not entirely wrong, but it is not entirely right either. I am a retired civil engineer. I spent 39 years designing infrastructure, bridges, drainage systems, highway underpasses, the kinds of structures that have to be right because when they are wrong, people die. I am a man who has spent the better part of his adult life understanding load-bearing capacity, understanding the difference between a structure that looks solid and a structure that actually is. Understanding that the most dangerous failures are not the dramatic, sudden collapses, but the slow, invisible ones, the cracks that develop in places you're not looking, the stress fractures that accumulate over time until one ordinary morning the whole thing comes down. I tell you this because I want you to understand that what happened to me was not the result of foolishness or inattention. It was the result of love. Of the specific, costly vulnerability that love requires, of the decision, made consciously and with full awareness of the risk, to trust another person with the weight of your life. I made that decision with Christina. Christina Marie ZAHA, née Hargrove, is 54 years old, 14 years my junior, a woman I met at a mutual friend's dinner party in Charleston, South Carolina, 9 years ago. She was warm and funny and direct in a way I found immediately refreshing. She laughed easily and listened carefully and had the kind of self-possession that comes from a woman who knows who she is and does not feel the need to perform it for anyone. She had been divorced once, 8 years prior, from a man whose name she mentioned rarely and without bitterness. She had a daughter from that marriage, Annabelle, who was 23 when I met Christina and who lived in Charlotte and worked at a marketing firm and visited on holidays and birthdays with the polite, measured warmth of a grown child who has decided to give her mother's new relationship a chance. Christina and I married 3 years after that dinner party. A small ceremony in Charleston, a honeymoon in Colorado, a move to our current home in Asheville, North Carolina, a beautiful craftsman house on a quiet street that Christina had found and fallen in love with before I had fully made up my mind about Asheville, and which I had agreed to because watching her fall in love with something was one of my favorite things to witness. I had been married before. My first wife, Margaret, passed away 11 years ago. A sudden thing, a stroke at 54, the kind of loss that rearranges everything about the way you understand time and certainty. We had no children. 6 years after Margaret, I was alone in the way that men who have been truly partnered become alone, not merely without company, but without the specific gravity of another person's life pulling against your own. Christina gave me that back. That gravitational pull, that sense of being anchored to something larger than yourself. I loved her. I want that to be clear, because everything that follows makes more sense if you understand that it happened inside love, not outside it. I was not a cold man who married strategically. I was a man who loved his wife and believed that love was mutual, and discovered, through a series of incremental revelations, that what I had understood as love had been, on the other side, a more complicated arrangement. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about the money first, because the money is where the structure started showing its cracks. If I had been paying the right kind of attention. I retired from the engineering firm at 65. My retirement package was substantial, 39 years with the same firm, a solid pension, and a portfolio of investments that my financial advisor had managed carefully enough to provide genuine security. In addition to the pension, I had taken on a part-time consulting role with a regional infrastructure nonprofit, working 2 days a week reviewing project proposals and providing technical oversight. The salary was not large, $54,000 a year, but it kept my mind engaged and my mornings purposeful, which at 65 is worth more than most people realize until they no longer have it. When Christina and I married, we made the decision to merge our finances. This was Christina's suggestion, and at the time I found it romantic, a declaration of full partnership, of shared life. We opened a joint checking account into which both our incomes were deposited. Christina had been running a small interior design business from home, which generated a regular but meaningful income. All household expenses, all vacations, all the daily ordinary spending of a shared life flowed from the joint account. In theory, this was partnership. In practice, and I understood this only gradually, the way you understand a slow thing, it was something else. The first time I noticed a discrepancy, I told myself I had misread the statement. This was 14 months into the marriage. I had been looking at the joint account online and noticed a series of transfers I didn't recognize, not to household vendors, not to any payee I could identify. When I mentioned it to Christina, she explained pleasantly that she had moved some money to cover Annabelle's rent for a couple of months, because Annabelle's marketing firm had gone through a restructuring and her hours had been cut. I nodded. This was reasonable. Annabelle was her daughter. Helping your child through a difficult patch was what parents did. The transfers continued the following month, and the month after that. I told myself Annabelle's situation was taking longer to stabilize than expected. I told myself it was not my place to interrogate how Christina supported her daughter. I told myself a great many things, in the reasonable, measured voice of a man who does not want the structure he has built his happiness on to be unsound. The numbers, though, did not lie. Over the first 2 years of our marriage, approximately $62,000 had moved from our joint account to Annabelle's various accounts and payment platforms. I know this because I am an engineer, and engineers, when they finally decide to look directly at a problem, are systematic about it. I spent 2 evenings in the spring of last year compiling every statement, every transfer, every transaction I could access, and I laid them out in order and looked at what they told me. $62,000. In addition to this, Christina's interior design business, which I had been supplementing from the joint account in its early growth phase, a phase that had now lasted for 3 years without producing the promised growth, had absorbed another $38,000 of shared funds. $100,000 over 3 years. Gone. Not fraudulently, not secretly, technically not in violation of any agreement we had made, because we had made no specific agreements about how joint funds were to be used. But gone in a direction I had not been consulted about, had not agreed to, had not been made aware of until I went looking. And when I went looking, I found something else. A conversation. On Christina's iPad, which she had left open on the kitchen counter one evening when she stepped out to the garden. I was not snooping. I want to be clear about this. I was looking for a recipe I had seen her search for earlier, and she had told me to look it up on the iPad. The screen was open to her messages with Annabelle. I read 3 exchanges before I understood what I was reading. Then I read them again. Then I sat down at the kitchen counter and did not move for a very long time. Because what those messages told me, in the casual, unguarded language that people use when they believe they are not being read, was that my wife and her daughter had a shared understanding of our financial arrangement that was nothing like the understanding I had. And it had been in place, it appeared, since before the wedding. I'm going to stop right here, because I need to know if anyone else has ever sat in a room and realized that something they trusted completely was not what they thought it was. Drop a comment below and tell me your thoughts. Because what I found on that iPad changed everything, and the story of what I did about it, and what happened next, is only just beginning. I need to tell you what I read. Not all of it. There were months of exchanges on that iPad, a history of conversation that I did not have time to fully read in the minutes before Christina came back inside from the garden. But enough. More than enough. The exchange that stopped me was recent, 2 weeks old, dated from a Saturday morning when Christina and I had been having breakfast together on the back porch, comfortable and unremarkable, the kind of morning that now felt like scenery painted on a flat surface. Annabelle had written, "Is he still putting the consulting money in the joint?" Christina had written back, "Yes. Every month, like clockwork. He doesn't really track it. He's not that kind of person." Annabelle, good. I need another for this month. Rent went up. Christina, I'll move it Tuesday. Don't worry. Annabelle, what about when he retires from the consulting thing? He mentioned he might cut back. Christina, He's got the pension and the portfolio. We'll be fine. I'm working on getting my name on the investment account too. Just taking it slow. Annabelle, smart. Don't rush it. Christina, I know how to handle him, baby. Don't worry. I know how to handle him. I sat at my own kitchen counter and read that sentence 4 times. Not because I couldn't understand it. I understood it perfectly, with the cold, specific clarity of a structural engineer identifying a catastrophic design flaw. I read it 4 times because I was giving myself the chance to misinterpret it, to find an alternate reading, to discover that it meant something other than what it obviously meant. It meant what it meant. I heard the back door, and I put the iPad down exactly as I had found it, and I went to the refrigerator and stood in front of it as though I were looking for something. And when Christina came in, she said, "Did you find the recipe?" And I said, "I think I was looking at the wrong thing." And she said, "It's fine. I'll find it." And I stood there in my kitchen listening to my wife tap on her iPad, and I felt the distance between what was on the surface of my life and what was underneath it become, in one moment, measurable. I did not confront her. Not then. I am 68 years old. I have been in situations, professional situations, difficult negotiations, moments of institutional conflict, where the worst possible move was to react before you were prepared, where showing your hand before you had examined all of it was the one mistake you could not recover from. So I did what I had been trained by 39 years of engineering to do. I assessed the full scope of the problem before I made a single move. Over the following 3 months, I assessed carefully. I went back through every financial record available to me. I spoke, quietly and without alarm, to my financial advisor, Marcus Webb, a meticulous man in his 50s who had been managing my portfolio for 12 years and who listened to what I told him with the steady, unreactive focus of a man who had heard most things before. I asked him specific questions about my investment accounts, about whose name was attached to what, about what the process would be for adding a spouse to an investment account, and what protections existed for assets acquired before marriage. Marcus said, very carefully, "Are you asking because you're planning to add Christina, or because you're planning not to?" "The second," I said. He nodded. He did not ask for an explanation. He simply began, with quiet efficiency, to walk me through the options. I also spoke to an attorney, a family law specialist in Asheville named Robert Daly, who confirmed what I had suspected, that in North Carolina, assets brought into a marriage and kept clearly separate from marital funds were generally protected in a separation proceeding, but that assets which had been commingled, contributed to joint accounts, used for shared purposes, occupied a grayer legal territory. The $100,000 that had left our joint account was likely unrecoverable, but the investment portfolio, the pension, the property I owned outright before the marriage, these could be protected. I was not thinking about divorce. I want to be honest about that. Even then, even sitting in Robert Daly's office with the printout of my financial records on his desk, I was not thinking about ending my marriage. I was thinking about protecting myself while I figured out what my marriage actually was. Those are different things, or at least, I needed them to be different things, because I was not yet ready to answer the larger question. The new card was Marcus's suggestion. A simple, practical step. Redirect my consulting income to a separate account in my name only. Keep the joint account funded for household expenses at a level sufficient for normal bills. But stop the flow of unrestricted money that had been funding, apparently, Annabelle's rent and lifestyle for 3 years without my knowledge or consent. It was not a dramatic act. It was not revenge, not yet. It was the basic structural move of a man who has discovered that the load distribution in his house has been wrong for years and is making the minimum necessary adjustment before the whole thing comes down. I made the change on a Monday morning in February. A quiet morning. I called Marcus. He set up the account. I redirected the automatic deposit from my consulting firm. By noon, the deposit that would normally have appeared in the joint account had not appeared. I know this because I can see online banking notifications from the joint account. I know precisely what time the expected deposit failed to arrive. And I know, from what happened next, that Christina and Annabelle were monitoring that account with a regularity and attention that told me everything I needed to know about the true nature of our arrangement. At 2:47 in the afternoon, my front door opened. Christina had a key, of course, but she had been at Annabelle's apartment in Charlotte for the past 3 days, a visit I had been told was for Annabelle's birthday, a girl's trip, back Wednesday. It was Monday. She came in first, then Annabelle behind her. Both of them still in their coats, still carrying the energy of a 2-hour drive made in urgency, and I could see it on their faces the moment they came through the door. Not surprise, not concern, not the face of a woman who had come home unexpectedly because something was wrong. Fury. The specific fury of people who have been denied something they believed was theirs. Christina stopped in the doorway to the living room where I was sitting. I had known they were coming, or suspected, from the moment I'd seen Christina's name flash on my phone twice without answering, then Annabelle's once. I had made tea. I had sat in my chair. I had decided to let the conversation come to me. "What did you do?" Christina said. Her voice was controlled, but only just. Underneath the control was something hot and cornered. "Hello, Christina," I said. "I didn't know you were coming back today." "What did you do with the account?" she said. "The deposit didn't come through." "No," I said. "It didn't." Annabelle came to stand beside her mother. She was 29 now, taller than Christina, with her father's jaw and her mother's eyes in an expression that, in this moment, was stripped of all the polite, measured warmth of a stepdaughter giving a relationship a chance. What I saw instead was something proprietary, something that looked at me and saw an obstacle. I had seen that expression before. It had been on my son Benjamin's face, once. I recognized it. "We just want to understand what's happening," Annabelle said, in a tone calibrated to sound reasonable. "Mom's been dealing with some business expenses, and the timing of the deposit matters for." "Annabelle," I said. "Sit down." Something in my voice, quiet, level, irrefutable, stopped her. She and Christina exchanged a glance. Then they sat, side by side on the couch across from my chair, and I looked at the two of them, and I thought about load-bearing capacity, and about the structures that look solid until they don't, and about the cold February light coming through the window of my living room in Asheville. "I'd like to have an honest conversation," I said. "I think it's long overdue. Let me stop right here, because I know you have a thought about this right now, and I want to hear it. What would you have done in that moment? Drop a comment below. Would you have stayed calm? Would you have said everything at once? Tell me, because how this conversation went is going to change everything." The thing about a room in which everyone knows exactly what the conversation is about, but no one has said it yet, is that it has a particular quality of pressure. Like the moment before a storm when the air changes and every living thing goes still. My living room had that quality. Christina sat with her hands folded in her lap, composed in the way that a person composes themselves when they are working hard. Annabelle sat beside her, and I noticed that their shoulders were almost touching, a small thing, a physical alignment, the kind of unconscious positioning that people do when they feel they are a unit facing something together. I noticed this and I filed it, and I began. "I want to start with what I know," I said. "Not what I suspect, not what I've inferred. What I know." I looked at Christina directly. 14 months into our marriage, you began transferring money from our joint account to Annabelle. Those transfers have continued for 3 years. The total, as of last month, is $62,000. Christina's expression did not change, but something in her jaw tightened. "In addition," I said, "our joint account has funded approximately $38,000 of expenses related to your interior design business, which has not generated a profit in 3 years of operation. That's $100,000 from a joint account to which I was the primary consistent contributor." "That account is both of ours," Christina said. Her voice was steady. "That's what joint means." "It does," I said, "which is why the decisions about how it's used should be made jointly, not unilaterally, not without my knowledge or consent." "You never asked," she said. "I never hid the statements from you. If you'd been paying attention." "I was paying attention," I said. "I just took longer than I should have to look directly at what I was seeing." A pause. Annabelle shifted on the couch. "Mr. ZAHA," she said, with the careful, reasonable tone she had deployed in the doorway. "My mother has been supporting you in this household for 3 years. She manages the home. She runs her business. Annabelle." I looked at her calmly. "I'm going to ask you to let your mother and me have this conversation. You're welcome to be here. But this is between Christina and me." Annabelle's mouth closed. She looked at her mother. Christina gave the smallest possible nod. I turned back to my wife. 2 weeks ago," I said, "I read a conversation between you and Annabelle on your iPad. I want you to know that I wasn't looking for it. I was looking for a recipe." The screen was open. The composure cracked. Not entirely. Christina was a controlled woman, but I saw it. The slight widening of the eyes, the involuntary intake of breath, the fraction of a second where she was calculating rather than present. "What did you read?" she asked. "Enough," I said. "I read enough to understand that what I thought our financial arrangement was, and what you and Annabelle understood it to be, are not the same thing." Silence. "I know how to handle him." I said the words quietly, without heat. I watched them land. Christina closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, something had shifted. The strategy had been adjusted in real time. I could almost see it happening. The composed, reasonable front was giving way to something more direct, something that had decided the performance was no longer necessary. "That was a private conversation," she said. "It was," I said. "And I'm sorry I read it without your permission. I'm telling you now because I'm not interested in having a conversation that pretends I don't know what I know." A long pause. "What do you want?" Christina said. And there it was. Not "I can explain," or "you've misunderstood," or any version of the softening and redirecting I might have expected. Just, "What do you want?" The negotiator's question. The question of a person who has moved past the pretense and wants to know the terms. It told me more than the messages on the iPad had. "Right now," I said, "I want the truth. That's all. I'm not serving you with papers. I'm not calling lawyers. I'm sitting in my living room on a Monday afternoon asking my wife to tell me the truth about our marriage." Annabelle made a sound. Not quite a laugh, not quite a scoff. Something dismissive and edged. "Annabelle," I said, still looking at Christina. "I understand that you love your mother and you're here because you're worried about her. I respect that. But if you cannot sit quietly, I need you to wait in another room." "She stays," Christina said sharply. "Then she stays quietly," I said. And the tone of it, the 68 years of experience and the 39 years of professional authority and the absolute, unperformative calm of a man who has moved past the point of being managed, sat in the room and did not move. Annabelle stayed quiet. Christina looked at me for a long moment. And then, slowly, something in her shoulders changed, a release of the held tension, a small, almost imperceptible settling. "I love you," she said. "I want to be clear about that first." "Okay," I said. "But when we got married, I had debts you didn't know about. From the divorce, from the years before I got the business going. I was embarrassed about them, and I handled them the way I've handled most things I'm embarrassed about, which is to not talk about them." "How much?" I asked. 40,000, she said. "Between a credit line and 2 cards. And Annabelle." A pause. Annabelle was in a bad situation. After the restructuring, she lost most of her income for almost a year. I couldn't watch my daughter struggle when I had access to money. "Our money," I said. "Yes," she said evenly. "Our money, which I used to help my daughter. I will not apologize for that." "I'm not asking you to apologize for helping Annabelle," I said. "I'm asking you to tell me why you didn't tell me. Why you didn't say, 'Christina has $40,000 in debt I haven't told you about.' Why you didn't say, 'Annabelle is struggling and I'd like us to help her.' Why, instead, you moved money without telling me and then told our daughter that you knew how to handle me." The word "handle" fell in the room like a stone in still water. Christina held my gaze. She was a proud woman. I had always known that. And I could see the pride doing battle with something else. Something that looked, if I was reading it correctly, like genuine discomfort. Not just at being caught. At being seen. "The debt," she said carefully, "I was ashamed of. I know that's not a complete answer. But I was ashamed of it. And I believed, I told myself, that I would pay it down quietly without it affecting us, and you'd never need to know. And when that didn't happen," I said, "it grew. And the more time passed, the harder it became to bring it up, because then I had to explain why I hadn't brought it up before. I understood this. Not the choice, but the mechanism. The way a small concealment becomes a larger one, becomes a pattern, becomes a foundational structure of a relationship built on something that isn't entirely real. I understood it because I had watched it happen with Benjamin, and I recognized the architecture. "And the message to Annabelle," I said, "about getting your name on the investment account, taking it slow, this one cost her more. I could see it." "Annabelle worries," she said. She was asking questions about our financial security, about what would happen to me if something happened to you, or if the marriage didn't. She was worried about me. And I told her what I thought she needed to hear. "You told her you were working on getting access to my premarital investment portfolio," I said. That is not a worried mother reassuring her daughter. That is a strategy. The silence was different now. Fuller. Christina looked at the window for a moment, then back at me. I have not done anything illegal, she said quietly. No, I said. You haven't. And I haven't been calculating every moment of this marriage. I believe that, I said. And I did. This was the complicated truth of it. People are not simply one thing. Christina was not simply a woman running a scheme on a credulous old man. She was also a woman who had sat with me through a difficult bout of pneumonia 2 winters ago and not left my side for 3 days. She was also the woman who remembered the exact date Margaret had died and always, without comment, made sure we were home that day and the evening was quiet. She was also the woman who had laughed with me on the back porch on 100 ordinary mornings in a way that could not have been entirely performance. People contain their betrayals and their love simultaneously. This is the most difficult thing about them. What I need to know, I said, is which of those things is more true. Whether what we have is real enough to build something honest on, or whether we have been, fundamentally, operating in different relationships. You in one that was always partly a financial arrangement, me in one I believed was a partnership. Annabel, for once, said nothing. I glanced at her and saw something on her face that surprised me. Not the strategic watchfulness of earlier. Something younger, something uncertain. A daughter watching her mother face something real and not knowing how to help. I felt, briefly, a flicker of compassion for her. She loved her mother. She had been, in her own way, trying to protect her mother. The methods were wrong and the complicity was real, but the root of it was love, and I knew better than most how love and poor judgment find each other. I need time to think, Christina said finally. I'm not going anywhere, I said. The house is ours to share tonight. But I need you to understand. The consulting income will stay in a separate account until we have had the full conversation. Not as a punishment. As a basic requirement of operating honestly. She nodded. Once. Tightly. And I need one more thing, I said. Tonight, after dinner, I need you to tell me everything. The debt, the full picture of Annabel's situation, the interior design business, all of it. Every number. Every decision. Not because I'm going to use it against you, but because I cannot make any decisions about this marriage without knowing the actual truth of it. Another pause. Okay, she said. It was a small word for the size of what it agreed to. I need to pause right here, because I know some of you are feeling away right now about how this conversation went. Tell me in the comments. Do you think Christina deserves a second chance at this point? Do you think forgiveness is even possible after this kind of betrayal? Drop your thoughts below, because what happens at that dinner table that night is going to shake everything. Dinner was not a comfortable meal. I cooked, not because I felt hospitable, but because cooking is one of the things I do when I need to keep my hands busy and my mind clear. I made pasta, a simple thing, a Tuesday night level meal that made no statement about the occasion except that bodies needed to be fed regardless of what the conversation around them was doing. I set 3 places at the kitchen table, because Annabel was still here and I was not going to ask her to leave. She was Christina's daughter. If this conversation was going to mean anything, it needed to happen in the full reality of that. They sat across from me. The table between us felt like a diagram. Christina had spent the hours between our living room conversation and dinner in the guest room with the door closed, and Annabel had been in the backyard on her phone, and I had moved through the kitchen with the quiet, methodical attention of a man preparing for something that required his full concentration. We ate in near silence for the first 10 minutes. The kind of silence that isn't empty but packed with the weight of deferred things. Then Christina put down her fork. The debt was $43,000, she said. Not 40. I rounded down earlier. I don't know why I did that. I looked at her. Okay. I had taken out a credit line during the divorce to cover attorney fees. My attorney was not cheap. And then afterward, when I was trying to get the design business started, I put expenses on 2 cards that I underestimated. She was looking at the table. When I met you, the total was $43,000. I had been carrying it for 4 years already. Were you planning to tell me before the wedding? I asked. A pause. Yes, she said. I planned to several times. And every time, I was afraid of what it would mean. You had been so straightforward about your own finances. So organized. You had no debt. You had the portfolio, the pension. And I was bringing this thing I was ashamed of, and I kept thinking, one more month. I'll pay more of it down, and then it won't seem so bad. And then we were married. I said. And then we were married. And telling you would have meant admitting I had hidden it. So the original problem became 2 problems. The debt, and the hiding of the debt. I understood the mechanism. I had seen it before in other contexts, other lives. The compounding weight of a secret. How much of it remains? I asked. 18,000, she said. I have been paying it down. Slowly, with the business income and some of the joint account. I know you can identify those payments now. But I have been paying it. I can see them, I confirmed. I didn't know what they were. I do now. She nodded. The business, I said. Tell me the real picture. She told me. The design business had clients, 3 regular ones, 4 or 5 occasional, and generated roughly $22,000 a year in revenue, against expenses that ran to $18,000. A $4,000 annual profit that had been represented to me, in the broad brushstrokes of our financial conversations, as a business that was building towards sustainability, which was technically not false, but was not the full picture. You told me last year it was close to breaking even, I said. It is close to breaking even. Christina. She met my eyes. I may have implied it was closer than it is. I wanted you to believe it was working. Because I needed to be working. It's mine. I built it. It's the only thing in my life that is completely mine. This landed differently than the debt. The debt was a practical failure of honesty. This was something more personal. The desperation of a woman who needed to believe her independent thing was real. I sat with it. Tell me about Annabelle, I said. Christina glanced at her daughter, who had been sitting very still throughout this conversation, eating nothing, watching her mother with an expression that had moved fully out of its earlier strategic register into something raw and younger looking. The restructuring at her firm was real, Christina said. She lost 60% of her income for about 8 months. She was genuinely struggling. Her rent, her car, she was close to having to move home. She paused. I would have told her to move home except her apartment is in Charlotte and her life is there. And I wanted to help her without dismantling what she'd built. I understand that, I said. And I did. Genuinely. But I should have told you, Christina said. I should have come to you and said, my daughter needs help. Can we help her? Instead I just handled it, I said quietly. The word moved across the table between us. Yes, she said. Instead I handled it. Annabelle put down her fork. She had been so still, so quiet, that when she spoke her voice surprised all of us, including, I think, herself. It's my fault, she said. Christina turned to look at her daughter. Annabelle. No, Mom. Let me. Annabelle looked at me. She had her mother's eyes, and in this moment they held something I had not seen in them before, not in 3 years of holiday visits and birthday dinners, and the careful, measured warmth she had always deployed in my direction. She looked at me like a person who was about to say something true after a long time of saying something else. When Mom first started seeing you, she said, I was protective of her. I had watched her go through the divorce and struggle for years, and then here was this man, older, stable, financially secure, and I wanted to make sure she was going to be okay. I wanted to make sure she wasn't going to end up in a bad position. That's reasonable, I said. The way I went about it wasn't, she said. I asked her questions. About your finances. About the accounts. About what would happen to her if things went wrong. And she answered them because I was her daughter and I was worried about her. And the answers made me. They made me think of your finances as something she had access to. Something that existed to protect her. She paused. I helped create the way she thought about it. The message you read, that was me pushing her. Asking her to think about the investment account. That wasn't just her. The table was very quiet. I know you have every reason to be angry with both of us, Annabelle said. I know that from your perspective this looks like 2 people who were taking advantage of you. And the money part, I can't excuse that. But I want you to know that my mother didn't marry you as a strategy. I know her. I know the difference. Her voice cracked, slightly, on the last sentence. She loves you. She's just also scared, and she's been scared for a long time, and I made that worse. I looked at Annabelle for a long moment. This young woman who had, at 23, decided to give her mother's relationship a chance and had gradually, over 3 years, allowed that choice to slide into something she was now sitting across a dinner table having to own. I appreciate you saying that, I said. It matters that you said it. She nodded, pressing her lips together. I turned to Christina. I need to ask you something, I said. And I need you to answer it without the answer you think I want to hear. Just the true one. She waited. When you got in the car today to drive back from Charlotte, I said, what were you planning to do when you got here? What was the plan? A long silence. I was going to tell you the deposit must have been delayed, she said. Technical issue. I was going to call Marcus and ask him what happened. I was going to try to find out what you'd done and manage the explanation. She held my gaze. That was the plan. And now? I said. She looked at me, really looked at me, in the way that two people who have been performing versions of themselves for each other sometimes look at each other when the performance falls away. In the way that is frightening because it is real. Now I'm terrified, she said. Because I'm sitting at this table having told you things I've been carrying for 3 years, and I don't know what you're going to do with them. And I realize that the reason I didn't tell you any of this before is because I was afraid of exactly this, of being seen clearly and found insufficient. She paused. And I also realized that keeping you from seeing me clearly was the thing that made all of this possible. That my fear of being known was more dangerous than being known would have been. I sat with this for a long time. Outside, the February night had settled over Asheville. The city was quiet in the way of cities that are small enough to remember quiet. The kitchen was warm, the pasta cooling on 3 barely touched plates, the overhead light making its ordinary domestic claim on the 4 walls of the room. I thought about Margaret. About 30 years of marriage to a woman who had never once in 30 years said anything to me she didn't mean. Whose honesty had been so consistent and so complete that I had, perhaps, entered my second marriage expecting the same honesty and not asking the questions that would have confirmed whether it was actually there. I thought about what it would mean to end this marriage. To pack up this house in Asheville, to dismantle the shape of the life I had built here for 6 years, to return to the aloneness that I had lived in after Margaret and that Christina had, whatever the complications, genuinely rescued me from. I thought about what it would mean to stay, what staying would require, what would have to be rebuilt, and what would have to be acknowledged, and what would never quite look the same as it had before this Monday in February. I'm not ending this marriage tonight, I said. Christina went very still. But I need you to understand something, I said. The marriage we had before today is over. Not because I'm ending it, because it was built on things that weren't entirely true, and those things are now on the table, and we cannot pretend they're not. I looked at her steadily. What I am offering is the chance to build a different one, a real one, with a financial advisor present, with a full accounting of everything, debts, accounts, Annabelle's situation, documented and agreed upon, with a therapist, because we clearly have a great deal to work through. With the understanding that any future financial decision that involves more than a trivial amount of our shared money is a conversation, not a unilateral action. Her eyes were wet. She was holding it, barely. And Annabelle, I said, turning to her daughter, I harbor no permanent ill will toward you. You love your mother. You went about it in a way that was harmful to me, and you'll need to sit with that. But I have no interest in making you an enemy or removing you from our lives. What I need from you is honesty going forward. That's all I have ever needed from the people in my life. Annabelle was crying, quietly, without drama, the tears of someone who had been holding something tight for too long and had just been given permission, unexpectedly, to put it down. Okay, she said. Just that. Okay. Christina reached across the table. Her hand rested on the table between us, palm up. Not grabbing. Not demanding. Just offered. I looked at her hand. At the woman across the table from me. At the 68 years of my life that had brought me to this kitchen on this February night, with this particular weight, and this particular choice. I placed my hand over hers. This is the moment I need you to weigh in on, because I know some of you are thinking he forgave too quickly, and some of you are thinking it took too long. Drop your thoughts in the comments right now. Because what comes next, what rebuilding this marriage actually looked like, is the part of the story that surprised even me. The first thing we did the following morning was call Marcus Webb. Not because I made her. Because Christina asked me, over coffee at 7 a.m. in the kitchen where we had eaten last night's halted dinner, if we could call him together. She had her notebook, the yellow legal pad she used for design client notes, the one that lived on the kitchen counter, and she had spent some portion of the night writing in it, and she set it on the table between us with the full accounting of her debts, the business finances, and the transfers to Annabelle laid out in her own handwriting. She had done it herself, without being asked. I looked at that legal pad for a moment before I looked at her. You didn't sleep? I said. No, she said. But I figured some things out. Marcus took the call at 9. He was, as always, professionally unreadable, but I had known him for 12 years, and I could hear the careful attention in his voice as Christina walked him through her numbers. He asked questions without judgment. He noted things. At the end, he said, with characteristic directness, that the picture was manageable, that the remaining debt was serviceable, that the business, with some restructuring of its expense model, could be made genuinely profitable, and that the first step toward putting the household finances on a healthy footing was a full joint financial review with both parties present. We scheduled that review for the following week. You didn't have to do this in front of him, I said, after I hung up. Yes, I did, Christina said. Because the whole problem is that I've been managing things in private. I needed to do the opposite of that, and I needed to do it with you watching. We called Robert Daly next, not because I was threatening the marriage, but because I believed, as I said in his office the following afternoon while Christina sat beside me, that any agreement we made going forward needed to be documented. Not as a weapon, as a foundation. Robert helped us draft what he called a financial transparency agreement, a simple document, not legally complex, establishing that both parties would have full visibility into all financial accounts, that no transfer exceeding $500 from joint funds would be made without mutual discussion, and that Annabelle's financial support, which we both agreed to continue at a reduced and defined monthly amount, would be treated as a line item in our household budget, visible and agreed upon, rather than a private arrangement. Christina signed it without hesitation. Annabelle, who drove back to Charlotte the morning after our dinner and called me 2 days later, was a more complicated matter. She called from her car, which I gathered from the road noise, and she spoke carefully and without her mother on the line, which told me she had chosen to make this call on her own terms. Mr. ZAHA, she said, I want to apologize properly, not the dinner table version. I've been thinking about it for 2 days, and I want to say it clearly. I'm listening, I said. What I did, the way I talked to my mother about your finances, the questions I pushed her to answer, the message about the investment account, it was wrong. It wasn't just protective. I was treating your money like it was a resource that belonged to my mother by right of marriage, and I was encouraging her to think about it that way too. It's not okay. And I'm sorry. I sat with this for a moment. 30 years of structural engineering had given me a sensitivity to things that were load-bearing and things that were decorative. This apology was load-bearing. It named the specific wrong thing without euphemism. Thank you, Annabelle, I said. That means a great deal. I also want you to know, she said, and her voice shifted slightly, something younger in it, something less composed, that I've been afraid of you ending up with my mom and then things falling apart and her being left with nothing. I watched her go through that once already. It was bad. And I think I handled my fear of that happening again by trying to make sure she had a safety net, and the way I went about it was, I went about it wrong. You were protecting your mother, I said. The instinct is not wrong. The method was. Yeah, she said quietly. I'm figuring that out. I want to say something to you, I said. Okay. Your mother did not marry me for financial security. I believe that. And I also believe that part of why I believe it is because she called Marcus Webb at 9 in the morning and sat at my kitchen table and read her debts out loud to a financial advisor she had been hiding from for 6 years. That is not what a woman does when her only investment in a marriage is access to money. I paused. I'm telling you this so you can put down some of the fear. It doesn't need to be carried the way you've been carrying it. A silence on the line. Long enough that I heard the road sound change. Thank you, she said finally. I thank you. Come for dinner sometime soon, I said. A real dinner, where everyone knows what's actually happening. She laughed, a surprised, slightly wet laugh. Okay, she said. Yeah, okay. We started couples therapy in March. Our therapist was a man named Dr. Franklin, who worked from a bright, simply furnished office in downtown Asheville, and who had the particular quality that the best therapists share, the ability to sit with two people in conflict and make both of them feel seen without taking sides. He had gray at his temples and reading glasses he pushed up onto his forehead when he was thinking, and in our first session he asked us both a question that I turned over for weeks afterward. He said, "What did you each need from this marriage that you didn't ask for directly?" Christina answered first. She said security, not financial security specifically. She clarified this when she saw my expression, but the deeper kind. The security of knowing that if she was seen completely, with her debts and her fears, and her imperfect business, and her complicated motherhood, she would not be found insufficient. that the person across from her would not leave. You were afraid that if I knew everything, I would go, I said. Yes, she said. So you managed what I knew? I said. Yes. I thought about this for a long time. About the specific cruelty of that fear. The way it causes a person to withhold exactly the thing that would create the security they need. To hide the real self in order to protect the relationship, not understanding that the relationship built on the hidden self is not the relationship they actually want. What about you? Dr. Franklin asked me. What did you need that you didn't ask for directly? I thought about it honestly. To be trusted with the real thing, I said. Not the managed version. Not the presentation. I spent my career working with reality as it actually was, not as we wished it were. I needed my marriage to be the same. I needed to know that the life I was living was the actual life. And when you found out it wasn't? Dr. Franklin asked. I was devastated is too dramatic. I was profoundly sad, I said. Not furious. Sad. Because I had built something I loved on a foundation that had gaps in it I hadn't known about. And I knew that the gaps were not meant to harm me. They came from fear, not malice. And that almost made it harder. Christina was looking at me with an expression I had not seen on her face in years. The composed, capable surface entirely gone, and underneath it something that was simply a woman, sitting in an office with reading glasses pushed up a therapist's forehead, hearing her husband describe his grief at her dishonesty as sadness rather than anger. She started to cry. I reached over and took her hand. I'm still here, I said. I'm still here, and I want to build the real thing. By April, the financial review was complete. Marcus had restructured our accounts with full transparency, individual accounts for each of us, a joint household account to which we contributed defined amounts monthly, and a clear documented arrangement for Annabelle's support, set at $800 a month for 1 year, after which it would be reassessed together. Christina's debt was on a formal repayment schedule. The design business had been reviewed by a small business consultant Marcus recommended, who identified 3 specific changes that, when implemented over the following 2 months, moved it from a $4,000 annual profit to a projected $18,000. Christina was proud of that. Not in a way she expressed loudly, but in the way I had seen her be proud of things before. A quiet, internal pride that showed in the straightness of her spine and the energy with which she went to her studio in the mornings. I was proud of her too. I told her so. She looked at me with the expression of a woman who was still getting used to being known and not found insufficient. You're allowed to enjoy this, I told her. I know, she said. I'm practicing. Annabelle came for dinner in April. An ordinary Sunday, the windows opened to the first real warmth of the year. Christina making the chicken recipe that had always been Annabelle's favorite. I grilled on the back porch, and Annabelle sat on the porch steps with a glass of wine, and we talked, for the first time in 3 years, without the careful, managed warmth of a stepdaughter and a stepfather performing goodwill at each other. We talked like people who had been honest with each other, who had said difficult things and were still both present. It was not entirely comfortable. Comfort would take time, and I was not going to pretend otherwise. But it was real, and real was what I had always wanted. At one point during the evening, Annabelle helped me carry plates from the kitchen, and she said, quietly, without looking at me, "She's different with you than she was before. Since everything happened. She's more herself." I think so too, I said. I think she was always scared that being herself completely would cost her something, Annabelle said. And now she knows it didn't. And that's, I don't know. It's good. It's really good to see. I thought about that on the drive back from a morning walk the next day. About the specific freedom of being known. About how many years people spend performing the version of themselves they believe is lovable, not understanding that the performance is precisely what prevents the love they're seeking. Christina had hidden her debts and her fear and her complicated finances and her imperfect business, and in the hiding had made herself less present in her own marriage. And the not hiding, the terrifying, forced, Monday afternoon not hiding, had given us something that the previous 6 years, for all their warmth and comfort, had not quite had. A foundation that was actually weight-bearing. I am 68 years old. I have spent my professional life understanding what holds things up. The invisible work of load-bearing structures. The places you cannot see that determine whether the visible thing stands or falls. A marriage is no different. What holds it up is not the surface, not the comfortable routines, the shared meals, the easy warmth of 2 people who have decided to find each other good company. What holds it up is the willingness to be honest when honesty is frightening, to be known when being known feels dangerous, to put the real numbers on the table and stay in the room while they are examined. Christina and I had nearly failed at that. We had built 6 years on a surface that had gaps below it. And then, on an unremarkable Monday in February, a redirected paycheck had pulled the surface back and shown us the gaps, and we had faced them. We are still facing them. This is not a story that ended with everything repaired and permanent. It is a story that is still happening. In the Tuesday therapy sessions, in the monthly financial reviews, in the Sunday dinners with Annabelle, in the mornings when Christina comes to the kitchen and makes coffee, and we sit together in the early light and are simply present with each other, without management, without performance, without the careful maintenance of a version of things. Just the real thing. Just us. I will take it. I will take it every day for whatever days are left to me, because I am 68 years old and I have learned, not without cost, not without heartbreak, but finally and completely, that the real thing, even when it is imperfect and fractured and rebuilt with visible seams, is the only thing worth having. Everything else is just a structure that looks solid until it isn't. The real thing holds. If you made it to the end of this story, I want to hear from you one last time. Comment below. Have you ever had to rebuild something you loved after finding out it wasn't exactly what you thought it was? Have you ever been the person who was hiding something out of fear and finally had to put it on the table? Have you ever forgiven someone not because it was easy, but because the alternative was walking away from something real? Tell me your story. Tell me what you think. Because every single comment reminds me that these stories, messy, human, imperfect, are the ones that matter most. Thank you so much for watching my story all the way to the end. Your support means everything. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts.